Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is reaching for a bottle of water. Maybe it's the elegant teardrop-shaped bottle sitting on a hotel nightstand in Manhattan, or the pomegranate juice squeezed into a bulbous little container that somehow costs $8 and makes you feel like a wellness guru for buying it. What if we told you that bottle, that juice, those pistachios in your pantry, those little mandarin oranges your kids tear through at halftime, all of it, every last drop and shell and segment, flows back to a single family, a family so powerful, so deeply embedded in the circulatory system of American agriculture that they have quietly come to own something far more valuable than oil, more contested than gold, and more essential than any luxury good ever sold. They own your thirst. Hi, my name is Stanley, and this is Old Money Life. The empire you've never heard of. Let's begin with a simple test. Say the name Rockefeller, and every person in the room knows what you're talking about. Say Carnegie, Getty, Vanderbilt. Instant recognition, instant reverence, instant mental image of gilded staircases and marble foyers. Now say the name Resnick. Silence. And yet Stuart and Linda Resnick preside over one of the most quietly staggering private fortunes in the United States. A fortune estimated in the range of $50 billion and built not on railroads or oil wells or software code, but on something every single human being on this planet cannot live without for more than 3 days. Water. The Resnicks are the founders and sole owners of the wonderful company, a privately held agricultural and consumer goods empire that you have almost certainly financially supported without ever knowing their names. Fiji Water, that's them. Palm. Wonderful, the pomegranate juice in the distinctive hourglass bottle, that's them. Wonderful pistachios, the ones with the Super Bowl commercials featuring talking animals, that's them. Halos, the little mandarin oranges marketed to children with a halo on the packaging. Also them. Teleflora, one of the largest floral delivery services in the world. Still them. And underneath all of it, threading through every acre of sun-baked California farmland like an invisible artery, are water rights so vast, so strategically accumulated over 4 decades, that the Resnicks use more water every single year than the entire city of Los Angeles. Read that sentence again. Let it settle. This is not a family that inherited a dynasty. This is not old money in the conventional sense. No European title, no ancestral estate with its own postcode. This is something arguably more fascinating and more instructive. This is the story of how 2 people from decidedly ordinary beginnings looked at the American West and saw something nobody else was paying close enough attention to, and then bought it quietly and methodically before the rest of the world understood what it was worth. This is the family that owns your thirst. From mop buckets to monopoly, the origins of Stuart Resnick. To understand the empire, you have to understand the man who built it. And to understand the man, you have to go back to Highland Park, New Jersey in the year 1951, where Stuart Resnick was born into a household that was comfortable enough to have ambitions, but not comfortable enough to rest on them. His father owned a bar, not a fashionable cocktail lounge in a prosperous neighborhood, a bar. The kind of establishment that teaches a young man early that money is not abstract, that it is earned in small increments by people on their feet for long hours, that nothing about financial security is guaranteed, and that the distance between having enough and having nothing is shorter than most people like to believe. Stuart absorbed those lessons early, and he absorbed them well. He enrolled at UCLA, which is where the Resnick origin story takes its first sharp, unexpected turn. To fund his education, young Stuart didn't flip burgers or stock shelves. He started a janitorial company. Now, I want you to sit with that for a moment, because there is something almost poetically American about it. A future billionaire on his hands and knees scrubbing floors to pay his way through university, building the operational instincts, the tolerance for unglamorous work, and the fundamental understanding of margins and labor costs that would later allow him to run a company worth tens of billions of dollars. By the time Stuart graduated from UCLA with a law degree in the early 1970s, the janitorial company he had built during his student years was generating real revenue. He parlayed that into a security alarm business called the Burglar Alarm Company of America, which he grew through aggressive telemarketing. And if you're thinking that telemarketing sounds a long way from pomegranate juice and Fijian spring water, You would be right. But stay with us because the through line here is not industry, it is instinct. Stuart Resnick has always had an extraordinary nose for assets that are undervalued by the market and overlooked by his peers. Security systems in the early 1970s were an unglamorous, low-prestige business that most ambitious young men with law degrees wouldn't have touched. He touched it, built it, and sold it for enough money to start asking a much larger question. What do I buy next? He would find the answer in the dirt of California's San Joaquin Valley, and in the water underneath it. The land and the water, building an agricultural colossus. The 1980s were a decade of excess for most of America's wealthy class. Manhattan penthouses, Concorde flights, leverage buyouts of glamorous corporations. Stuart Resnick went to the farm. More precisely, he went to the distressed farm. California's agricultural sector in the early and middle part of that decade was quietly hemorrhaging. Commodity prices were volatile, interest rates were brutal, and scores of farming operations were failing or floundering, their land available at prices that reflected despair rather than true long-term value. Resnick, the former janitorial entrepreneur, the security system salesman, walked into this landscape and began to buy. He acquired Paramount Farms, which would eventually become the nucleus of the entire wonderful company empire, and with it came tens of thousands of acres in the San Joaquin Valley, the agricultural heartland of California and one of the most productive farming regions on Earth. He planted almonds, he planted pistachios, he planted pomegranates, a crop so obscure at the time that most American consumers couldn't have told you what one tasted like, which, as we'll discuss shortly, was precisely the kind of opportunity the Resnicks found irresistible. By the early 2000s, Paramount Farms was the largest pistachio grower and processor in the world. It was the largest almond grower in the world. Stuart Resnick, the son of a New Jersey bar owner, the man who once cleaned office buildings to pay for law school, had become the single most powerful figure in American nut farming. And I say that with complete sincerity, because American nut farming, it turns out, is a multi-billion-dollar industry and a useful reminder that glamour and value are entirely different things. But here is where the Resnick story transforms from impressive to genuinely extraordinary. Embedded in every acre of that San Joaquin Valley farmland, acquired quietly and methodically through the 1980s and 1990s, were water rights. In California, water rights are not a peripheral detail of land ownership. They are, in many cases, worth more than the land itself. The state's agricultural economy runs entirely on irrigation, sourced from a complex and politically charged patchwork of river allocations, groundwater agreements, and federal water contracts. To own the water rights attached to tens of thousands of acres of prime California farmland is not merely to own a farming operation. It is to own a piece of California's future. Whether Stuart Resnick fully understood this in 1984 when he began buying is a matter of some debate. What is not a matter of debate is what he did with those rights once he had them. He accumulated more. He joined water agencies, he lobbied legislators, he donated to political campaigns with the strategic precision of a man who understands that in the American West, water is power, and power requires cultivation just like any other crop. The Fiji water coup. If Stuart is the empire's architect, Linda Resnick is its storyteller. And the story she told most brilliantly, arguably the marketing masterstroke of the modern premium beverage industry, was the story of Fiji water. The Resnicks acquired Fiji water in 1997 for a reported $15 million. Now, in the context of their agricultural holdings, $15 million was not an enormous sum. But what they saw in Fiji water was not its present value. It was its narrative potential. Here was a product with a genuinely extraordinary origin story. An artesian aquifer on a remote South Pacific island, untouched, they claimed, by the industrial contamination and municipal processing that consumers were increasingly wary of in their tap water. The bottle design was distinctive. The word Fiji on the label carried an almost involuntary association with paradise, with purity, with a kind of pristine, untouched nature that modern urban consumers had begun to fetishize with remarkable commercial reliability. Linda Resnick, whose background in advertising we will explore more fully in the next chapter, understood that she was not selling water. She was selling an idea, specifically the idea that drinking this particular water made you the kind of person who drinks this particular water. It sounds circular because it is, and it works precisely because it is. This is the oldest trick in the premium consumer goods playbook, and Linda executed it with more flair than almost anyone in her generation. By the mid-2000s, Fiji water was in every high-end hotel minibar in America. It was in the hands of celebrities at awards shows, placed there deliberately, by the way, as part of a seeding strategy that would make modern influencer marketing look unsophisticated by comparison. By 2007, Fiji Water was generating revenues north of $100 million annually. Today, industry estimates place its contribution to the wonderful company's bottom line in the hundreds of millions every single year. And here is the detail that tends to make people set down their bottles mid-sip. The Fijian government has repeatedly noted that a significant portion of the island nation's population lacks consistent access to clean drinking water. The country from which the Resniks extract and sell one of the world's most aspirational hydration brands has, at various points, had boil water advisories in its own communities. The Resniks have paid taxes and royalties to the Fijian government, and they have defended their operations as a meaningful source of employment and economic activity for the island. These are not dishonest claims, but the image, the almost novelistic irony of it, has followed Fiji Water like a shadow through every profile and investigation written about the brand and the family behind it. The man who owns more water than Los Angeles. Let us now address what is, in the fullest assessment of the Resnik Empire, the most staggering single fact in this entire story. Stuart Resnik's agricultural operations use approximately 120 billion gallons of water per year. The city of Los Angeles, home to nearly 4 million people, uses approximately 114 billion gallons per year. One family, one farming operation, more water than America's second largest city. How does this happen? How does any private citizen accumulate control over a natural resource on this scale in a democratic country? The answer involves the Kern County Water Agency, the Westlands Water District, the Byzantine architecture of California water law, and a level of political engagement that the Resniks have pursued with the same disciplined intentionality they have brought to every other aspect of their business. Between 2010 and 2020, the Resniks and entities connected to their business interests donated tens of millions of dollars to political campaigns and causes at both the state and federal level. California water politics is notoriously opaque. A world of appointed boards, long-term contracts, and regulatory frameworks so complex that most journalists and many legislators freely admit they do not fully understand them. It is precisely the kind of terrain where sustained, well-funded engagement yields returns invisible to the casual observer. The Resniks hold what are known as long-term water contracts through federal irrigation projects. Arrangements originally designed to support small and mid-sized family farms in the American West. The scale at which those contracts are now concentrated in a single private operation was not what the architects of those programs envisioned. Whether it is legal, and as far as anyone has been able to establish, it largely is a separate question from whether it was the intended outcome of public water policy. Then there is the Cadiz Water Project, a proposal backed by interests connected to the Resniks that would pump ancient groundwater from the Mojave Desert aquifer and sell it to Southern California municipalities. Environmental groups and scientists have warned that this could irreversibly damage one of California's most fragile desert ecosystems. The project has been approved, challenged, reapproved, and re-challenged in a regulatory saga that is now stretched across more than 2 decades. It remains, at the time of writing, unresolved. What is resolved is the fundamental reality of the Resniks' position. In a state where climate change is intensifying drought conditions every decade, where the snowpack that feeds California's rivers is shrinking, where every projection from every credible scientific institution suggests that fresh water in the American West will become dramatically scarcer and dramatically more contested in the coming generations. In that state, this family sits atop water rights of a scale that no other private individual or family in America can match. Linda Resnik, the architect of desire. Every great empire needs a visionary, and in the Resnik operation, that title belongs unambiguously to Linda. Born Linda Sine in 1941, she was running her own advertising agency in Los Angeles by the time she was barely out of her teens, which is the kind of biographical detail that makes you want to sit down and reconsider your own productivity, frankly. She met Stewart in the 1970s, married him, and proceeded to become something rarer and more valuable than a corporate executive. She became the person who could look at a pistachio and see a personality, look at pomegranate juice and see a health movement, look at a bottle of water from a Pacific island and see a cultural object. Palm. Wonderful is perhaps her most instructive case study. When the Resnicks began growing pomegranates at scale on their California farms, the fruit was essentially unknown to mainstream American consumers. Linda did not commission a modest introductory marketing campaign. She funded independent scientific research into the health benefits of pomegranate juice, helped bring that research to public attention, and then placed her distinctively shaped bottle, designed to look like two pomegranates stacked on top of each other, which I will admit is either brilliant or slightly absurd depending on your mood, into the hands of the exact consumers most likely to pay $8 for a juice because a study suggested it might be good for their heart. Palm. Wonderful revenues went from negligible to over $140 million within a few years of launch. Linda has also written a memoir, Rubies in the Orchard, in which she articulates her marketing philosophy with the confidence of someone who has earned the right to articulate it. She has been a significant philanthropist, particularly in the arts and education in Los Angeles. The Resnicks donated $200 million to Caltech. At the time, one of the largest gifts in that institution's history. They have funded museums, medical research, and community programs throughout California. The philanthropy is genuine. It is also, as cynics will note, the kind of giving that builds the social architecture of legitimacy around a family whose business practices generate less comfortable conversations. Both things can be true simultaneously. And, in the Resnick story, they are. The price of thirst. Backlash, critics, and controversy. For most of their ascent, the Resnicks operated in the comfortable obscurity of a family that is extremely powerful and almost entirely unphotographed. That began to change with a degree of investigative seriousness around the early 2010s as California's drought crisis moved from a regional concern to a national story. The New Yorker published a landmark profile of the Resnicks and their water holdings that became one of the most shared pieces of long-form journalism of its year. A detailed, meticulous accounting of how a private family had come to exert more influence over California's water supply than virtually any public institution. ProPublica followed with its own investigations. Environmental journalists and water policy researchers began to name what they saw as the central problem, that a public resource, one without which human life is simply not possible, had been effectively privatized through a combination of shrewd land acquisition, sustained political investment, and regulatory frameworks never designed to accommodate this degree of private concentration. The criticism falls into several distinct categories. There are environmentalists who argue that the volume of water Resnick farms extract from already overtaxed California, aquifers, and river systems is accelerating the environmental degradation of the state's Central Valley. There are water policy advocates who argue that the concentration of water rights in a single private operation represents a structural failure of public resource management. And there are community voices from the towns near Resnick farmland who describe a landscape in which the water table has dropped measurably, and local wells have run dry, while the almond trees on Wonderful Company farms continue to drink at scale. The Resnicks have not been silent in response to these criticisms. They have argued that their farming operations represent the most economically and agriculturally productive use of California's water resources, that the almonds and pistachios grown on their land generate enormous export value for the state, and that their investment in water efficiency technology has actually reduced per-acre water consumption over time. Independent assessments have confirmed that Wonderful Company farms do employ relatively sophisticated drip irrigation technology. What those assessments cannot resolve is the deeper philosophical question, the one that the Resnick story poses more sharply than perhaps any other private fortune in contemporary America. At what point does the private ownership of a public necessity become something that democratic societies should not permit? And who decides? These are not comfortable questions. They do not have easy answers, but they are the questions that the Resnick empire makes unavoidable. what the future of water looks like. And who will control it. Step back from the Resnick story, specifically for a moment, and look at the wider horizon. Because what this family has built is not merely a fascinating episode in the history of American private wealth. It is a preview of the defining resource conflict of the 21st century. The United Nations has warned with increasing urgency for more than a decade that global water scarcity will be among the most serious humanitarian challenges of the coming generations. By 2050, projections suggest that more than 5 billion people could face water shortages for at least 1 month of every year. The aquifers that supply groundwater to the world's most productive agricultural regions, including the San Joaquin Valley, are being drawn down faster than they can be replenished by rainfall. In this context, water rights are not merely a California agricultural issue. They are a global asset class. Institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds, and private equity firms have been quietly building water-related investment portfolios for years. The model that Stuart Resnick deployed, buy the land, secure the water rights, build the brands, is being studied and replicated by financial actors operating on a scale that would make even the wonderful company look modest. What the Resnick story tells us, if we are paying attention, is that the fortunes of the 21st century will not be built on oil wells or railroad lines. They will be built on aquifers. They will be built on river allocations and groundwater contracts and the political relationships required to protect them. They will be built on thirst. The family that understood this earliest, most completely, and with the greatest strategic commitment, built a $50 billion empire that most people have never heard of. How many others are building the same thing right now, in the same quiet, methodical, unglamorous way that Stuart Resnick once cleaned office buildings, while the rest of the world looked elsewhere? And there you have it, the story of Stuart and Linda Resnick, the most powerful family in American agriculture, the private owners of Fiji Water, PM Wonderful, Wonderful Pistachios, Halos, and, depending on how you count the water rights, a very significant portion of California's liquid future. $50 billion built not in the boardrooms of Wall Street or the server farms of Silicon Valley, but in the soil and the aquifers of the American West, assembled acre by acre, water contract by water contract, brand by brand, while the rest of the country was looking at more glamorous empires in more glamorous places. Now, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Is the private ownership of water rights on this scale something democratic societies should accept as the price of entrepreneurial ambition? Or does Stuart Resnick's empire represent a fundamental failure of public resource management that the next generation will have to reckon with? We genuinely want to know what you think. So, leave your thoughts below. As always, thank you for joining me on Old Money Life. I'm Stanley. Cheers, until next time.